sun was low, casting long, golden shadows across the serene waters of Clearview Lake. The gentle hum of the breeze stirred the pine trees, filling the air with a sense of calm that Malik Carter had grown accustomed to over the years. Sitting in a small wooden boat, the rhythmic pull of his fishing rod in his hands was a soothing reprieve from the chaos he'd left behind. His son, Jamal, was nearby on the dock, his small hands carefully assembling a model airplane. The simplicity of this life, away from the noise and clamor of the world, was all Malik had ever wanted. But then everything shifted. A high-pitched scream pierced the peaceful silence, the sound of distress rising rapidly. Malik's heart lurched as he looked up, squinting against a bright sky. A jet, its engine trailing smoke, was plummeting toward the lake, twisting and spinning out of control. Before Malik could even comprehend what was happening, the plane crashed into the water with a deafening roar, sending a towering spray of foam and debris into the air. Without thinking, Malik dropped his fishing rod and dove into the murky depths, his pulse racing. His body sliced through the water as he swam toward the wreckage, his mind only focused on one thing: saving whoever was still alive. He found her, struggling against the twisted metal, blood flowing from a wound on her forehead. Her body was limp and her breathing shallow. Malik didn't know who she was, but the instinct to protect and rescue surged within him. With a strength born from years of hard work, he pulled her through the wreckage, his arms burning as he dragged her to safety. He didn't have time to think about who she was or why she mattered. All that mattered was that she needed him. As the morning light spilled over the small cabin the next day, the weight of the previous evening hit Malik in waves. The television flickered to life with a breaking news alert, flashing images of helicopters circling the crash site. The voice of the anchor echoed through the small room, urgent and matter-of-fact. Billionaire CEO Zainab Hale survives plane crash, rescued by an unidentified hero. Malik turned off the television, the sound of the screen growing muted as he stared at the static. His chest tightened, the ghosts of his past stirring. Heroes, he knew, didn't get to bask in glory. They didn't get recognition. They were often left with complications. Complications he had no interest in. Malik had no need for fame or attention. All he wanted was to live quietly with his son, to leave behind the painful past that haunted him. But that quiet life was about to be disturbed. At exactly 10 a.m., the sound of powerful engines broke the stillness, too deep and too rich to belong to the normal rural traffic. Malik's pulse quickened as 3 sleek black Cadillacs appeared, their polished hoods reflecting the morning sunlight. The engines roared to a stop just outside his cabin. The door to the first car swung open, revealing a tall woman stepping out, dressed in a sharp business suit that seemed out of place in this remote corner of the world. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek ponytail, and though her face bore bruises from the crash, her eyes remained clear and commanding. She was undeniably beautiful, her presence dominating the quiet surroundings. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though it carried an undeniable weariness. "You saved my life." Malik hesitated, the weight of her gaze making him feel exposed, though he'd known her for less than a day. He looked her over, recognizing her now. Zainab Hale, CEO of Hale Dynamics. The very same woman whose plane he'd rescued, the woman whose name had been splashed across the news, the woman he had no business getting involved with. She extended her hand. For a long moment, Malik stood frozen before accepting it, his grip firm but hesitant. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said, his voice low and quiet. Zainab's lips quirked slightly in a half-smile, the kind of smile that was both appreciative and guarded. "Not many would have done what you did. Most people would have filmed it and posted it online before offering help." Her words hung in the air, but before Malik could respond, 2 assistants emerged from the other cars, holding leather folders and tablets. One of them presented Malik with an envelope. thick with papers. "We'd like to offer you compensation for your bravery," one of the assistants said. "We also have a standard non-disclosure agreement." Malik glanced at the envelope, his mind briefly flashing back to a time when he had been given another envelope, filled with a settlement check, an attempt to buy his silence after the crash that had killed his wife. His jaw tightened, the bitterness of that moment creeping into his chest. "I don't want money," he said, looking Zainab in the eyes. "And I don't sign things anymore." Zainab studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though she was trying to piece together something unspoken. After a long pause, she nodded. "Thank you again, Malik," she said, her voice softer now, almost understanding. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." She turned and walked back toward the Cadillacs, her assistants following behind her as the cars drove off into the distance. Malik stood on the porch, watching the dust settle in the wake of their departure. His world, once so quiet and simple, had been shattered. He could already feel the weight of the storm approaching. That night, the sound of rain pounding against the roof seemed almost deafening. Malik sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. Across from him, Jamal sat quietly, his eyes wide with innocent confusion. The media storm had already begun, rumors circulating about the crash and Malik's involvement. There was no escaping the whispers, no hiding from the public eye now. "Dad, why are people saying you're bad?" Jamal asked, his small voice full of concern. Malik squeezed his son's hand, his heart aching at the sight of his boy's uncertainty. "People get scared of things they don't understand," he replied softly. "But it'll pass." In that moment, Malik realized it wouldn't pass. The world had already made its judgment. But Malik wasn't afraid of the world's opinion. What hurt was the fear that Jamal might one day believe those lies. As the days went by, Zainab's visit remained on Malik's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter wasn't just a random act of fate. There was something deeper there, something in her eyes that spoke of unspoken burdens and a desire for change. But it was none of his business. He had his own life to live, and the last thing he needed was to become entangled with someone like her. Yet, despite his resolve, Malik couldn't help but feel drawn to her. And it wasn't just because of the crash. There was a pull, a magnetic force between them, one neither of them could deny. Zainab, meanwhile, found herself haunted by Malik's quiet strength. She had dealt with powerful men all her life, but there was something different about Malik. He didn't seek anything from her, didn't want her money, didn't need her protection. And yet, there was a shared vulnerability between them, a shared need to heal, to be seen and understood. Her role in the media frenzy, her position as the CEO of Hale Dynamics, had forced her to bury her emotions beneath layers of professionalism. But with Malik, there was no pretense. There was no mask. And for the first time in years, Zainab felt the urge to open herself up, to take a chance on something more than just business. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened. The attraction was undeniable. But so was a sense of duty that lingered over them both. Malik had already lost so much. Zainab, despite her success, had lost her sense of self. The weight of the world, of expectations of the past, hung between them, but they couldn't ignore what was growing between them. One night, after a heated discussion about the media's portrayal of Malik's rescue, the tension finally broke. Their lips met in a kiss, slow at first, tentative, but then with an intensity that spoke of years of longing, of pain, and of the raw connection that had been building beneath the surface. The kiss was electric, charged with the kind of intensity that left them both breathless. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything they hadn't said, everything they hadn't dared to feel until that moment. As their bodies pressed together, there was no more hesitation, no more fear. There was only the warmth of each other's presence, the shared understanding of what it meant to truly be seen. The days after Zainab's visit passed in a blur. The peaceful rhythms of Malik's life began to feel like distant memories as the world around him shifted. The quiet hum of his cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The news about the crash was relentless, the media scrutiny intensifying with each passing hour. Despite his best efforts to keep his son shielded from the chaos, Jamal's innocent questions began to feel like daggers in Malik's heart. "Why does everyone keep saying you're a hero, Dad?" Jamal had asked one evening, his small voice tinged with confusion. Malik had smiled gently, ruffling his son's hair. "Heroes don't need to be in the spotlight, son. We do what's right, even when no one's watching." But as the days wore on, Malik found it harder to convince himself of that. The truth was, the media had already written its own version of the story, and Malik had become a part of a narrative he never wanted to be a part of. The constant rumors, the whispers, the online speculation, it all threatened to undo the life he had worked so hard to build. The quiet isolation of the cabin had once been his refuge, but now it felt like a trap. And then Zainab returned. It was late afternoon when the black Cadillacs rolled back into the clearing near the cabin, their sleek forms glinting in the fading sunlight. This time it was just Zainab. No assistants, no media circus. Just her. As the car came to a stop, Zainab stepped out, her posture just as commanding as before, but her eyes softer. She was no longer the unapproachable CO. There was something vulnerable in the way she stood there, as though the weight of the world had finally caught up with her. Malik was chopping wood on the porch when he saw her. He paused, his axe hanging midair as their gazes locked. For a moment, there was no need for words. The air between them was thick with the unspoken, heavy with everything they had left unsaid. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a silence that felt like a promise and a challenge all at once. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden steps as she approached him. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said softly, her voice laced with both gratitude and something deeper, something more uncertain. Malik remained standing, the axe still in his hand. "You already thanked me," he replied, his voice hoarse. He wasn't sure why he felt so guarded. Perhaps it was the unease that came with having his life exposed, or perhaps it was a magnetic pull he felt whenever Zainab was near. Zainab smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been thinking about you, about everything." There was something raw in her words, something that made Malik's chest tighten. His heart raced as he watched her, trying to read the depths of her emotions. She took another step closer, and Malik noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the subtle flicker of vulnerability that she usually kept hidden behind the facade of her corporate world. I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to ask for help, or even if I should, but I can't do this alone." Malik's breath caught in his throat. There was something so real about her, something far beyond the polished exterior of the CEO. In this moment, she wasn't the powerful woman he had seen on television. She was just a woman, lost and unsure, seeking something she couldn't name. Without thinking, Malik set the axe down, his hands trembling as he reached out to her. She met him halfway, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The world, the media, the rumors. It all ceased to exist as her hands brushed, a simple touch that felt electric. Zainab closed the distance between them, her body moving against his, and for a moment there was no past, no future, only this connection, this undeniable pull between them. "I'm not asking for anything," Malik murmured, his voice rough as he cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "I don't expect anything in return." Zainab's eyes softened, her breath catching as she leaned into his touch. "I'm not sure what I want," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion, "but I know what I feel when I'm with you." Before Malik could respond, Zainab closed the space between them. her lips finding his in a kiss that was both gentle and intense, a clash of emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he kissed her back, his hands moving to pull her closer, feeling the heat of her body against his. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything they hadn't been able to say, everything they hadn't allowed themselves to feel. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, Malik let go of all his fears, all his doubts. The world outside didn't matter. There was only this moment, only the undeniable chemistry between them. His hand slid beneath her blazer, feeling the warmth of her skin, and for a brief second, the emotional weight of their past faded, replaced by the raw, tangible desire that had been building between them. But even in that moment of intimacy, reality crept in. Malik pulled away just enough to look at her, his forehead resting against hers. "We can't keep doing this," he whispered, his breath ragged. Zainab's eyes fluttered open, and she searched his face, her expression one of uncertainty and longing. "Why not?" she asked, her voice low, pleading. "Because I'm not what you need," Malik said softly, though his body screamed the opposite. "I've been broken for too long." Zainab reached up to trace the lines of his jaw, her touch tender yet insistent. "Then let me help you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Let me be the one to heal you." For a moment, Malik simply stood there, caught between the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. He wanted to believe in her, wanted to believe in them. But the weight of his past, of his own guilt, made it hard to take that step forward. "I don't know if I'm ready," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Zainab's gaze softened, and she cupped his face in her hands, her thumb brushing across his lips. "Then take your time. But don't shut me out. Don't shut this out." And just like that, the world outside no longer mattered. There was only Zainab, only the promise of something new, something real, growing between them. As the days passed, Malik and Zainab's relationship continued to evolve, a complex dance of longing and restraint. Despite their undeniable chemistry, both struggled with the weight of their individual pasts. Malik's trauma and the scars left by a corporate world that failed him, and Zainab's battle with her family's legacy and her decision to expose the truth. But every moment spent together seemed to chip away at the walls they had both built around their hearts. Zainab's presence became a constant in Malik's life. She no longer visited only out of obligation or to express her gratitude for his heroic act. Now, it was about something deeper, something more complicated. Their meetings had become more frequent, the conversations longer, as though they were both trying to make sense of this connection neither had anticipated. They talked about everything and nothing, about their past, their hopes, and the unspoken fears that lingered in the background. One afternoon, as the sun cast a warm, golden glow over the cabin, Zainab arrived without warning. She stepped out of the black Cadillac and walked toward Malik, her eyes bright, but tinged with something that wasn't quite sadness, but more like a longing for something more. She looked different today, vulnerable in a way she hadn't shown before. Gone was the polished, composed CEO. In her place was a woman who was lost, yearning for something she couldn't quite name. "Malik," she began, her voice quiet but filled with intensity, "I need to tell you something." Malik, who had been tending to garden outside, wiped his hands on his jeans and turned to face her. His heart beat a little faster, the familiar pull between them growing stronger with each passing day. "What is it?" Zainab took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I'm not sure I can do this anymore," she said, her voice faltering for the first time in their time together. "I thought stepping down as CEO, revealing the truth about Hale Dynamics, I thought that would give me the closure I needed. But every time I look at you, I realize I'm not just fighting for justice anymore. I'm fighting for something else. Something I never expected." Malik's gaze softened, his heart swelling with something he couldn't name. "You don't have to explain it to me," he said gently. stepping closer to her. "You're not alone in this." Her eyes searched his face, trying to find something to hold on to. "But I am alone, Malik. I've always been alone. And now I'm afraid to let anyone in." The raw vulnerability in her words struck him, and without thinking, he reached out, brushing his fingers gently across her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as though she were trying to memorize the feeling of it. "I won't hurt you," Malik whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise everything will be easy, but I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." Zainab opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, mixed with the uncertainty of someone who had been hurt too many times to trust easily. "I want to believe that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want to believe in us." Malik took a step back, his hand falling to his side as he studied her. He wasn't sure where this path was leading, but one thing was clear. He couldn't deny the connection between them any longer. "Then let's take it one step at a time," he said, his voice steady but full of longing. "No pressure, no expectations." Zainab nodded slowly, her lips parting as she took a deep breath. "I can't promise anything either," she said softly, "but I want to try." The silence that followed was charged with an unspoken understanding. The distance between them felt impossibly small as Zainab stepped closer once again. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative and full of uncertainty, but it quickly deepened, fueled by months of unspoken desire. Malik's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss grew more urgent, more desperate. Zainab responded eagerly, her body pressing against his, her hands sliding up to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. There was no more distance between them, no more barriers, just the overwhelming need to be close, to share this connection that had been simmering for far too long. The kiss broke, but neither of them moved away. They stood there for a moment, breaths heavy and hearts pounding in sync. Zainab rested her forehead against his, her hands gently cradling his face. "This is real, isn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Malik nodded, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "This is real." The next few days were a blur of quiet moments and intense emotions. Zainab and Malik spent more time together, their connection growing deeper with each passing hour. They shared their stories, their dreams, and their fears, finding solace in each other's presence. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the pressure from the outside world. The media frenzy surrounding the crash had not subsided. Malik's name had been dragged through the mud, and though Zainab had done her best to shield him, the weight of the public's judgment was impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day of work, Malik sat on the porch, watching the sunset with Jamal by his side. The silence between them was comforting, as it always had been. But tonight, there was an edge to it, a quiet tension that neither could ignore. "Are you happy here, Dad?" Jamal asked, his voice small but full of curiosity. Malik looked down at his son, the weight of the question pressing on his chest. "I am," he said softly. "But sometimes I wish things were different." Jamal leaned against him, his small body warm and trusting. "I think we're good here, Dad. I like it here. I like being with you." Malik's heart swelled with love for his son. The guilt that had haunted him for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. But even as he embraced the simple life he had built, he knew that he could never fully escape the world he had left behind. And then there was Zainab, the woman who had stepped into his life unexpectedly, igniting feelings he had long buried. As much as Malik tried to keep his distance, he couldn't deny the pull between them. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Zainab had changed everything. Their relationship deepened further over the next few weeks, each encounter more intimate than the last. Zainab's vulnerability had unlocked something in Malik, something he'd been too afraid to face for years. In her, he found a kindred spirit, someone who understood his pain, his loss, and his longing for something more. One night, as the moonlight bathed the cabin in a soft glow, Zainab came to him once again, her body trembling with anticipation. This time, there was no hesitation. The kiss they shared was deep and slow, the kind of kiss that spoke of everything they had been through and everything they were about to share. The intimacy between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, raw, and honest. As their bodies came together, there was no more distance, no more uncertainty. There was only the present moment, the heat of their connection, and the promise of a future neither could yet fully comprehend. But as they lay together in the quiet of the cabin, their hearts beating in unison, both knew that this was only the beginning. The world outside was still waiting for them, but for the first time in a long time, Malik felt ready to face it. And as long as Zainab was by his side, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. As the days turned into weeks, Malik and Zainab found themselves caught in a whirlwind of emotions, each day unraveling deeper layers of their connection. The quiet moments they shared, those fleeting, intimate exchanges, had become their anchor, yet the weight of the outside world continued to press in on them. Despite the undeniable chemistry and the desire that had grown between them, both felt the constant pull of their pasts and the unresolved issues that lingered. Zainab's decision to expose her family's corruption and step down as CEO had made waves. The media frenzy had not subsided, but now there was a new angle to the story. The quiet, unlikely hero who had saved the billionaire CEO. Malik had become a subject of fascination, but also suspicion. The whispers behind his back, the curious glances in town. It all felt suffocating. But it wasn't just the media that made him uncomfortable. It was the way the world saw him, as a man defined by the crash, by the rescue. His life had been reduced to a single act of bravery, and it left him feeling hollow. But Zainab, she was different. She never treated him like a hero. She saw him, Malik Carter, the man behind the act of saving her. She understood the weight of the trauma he carried, the ghosts of the past that haunted him. In a way, she had her own burdens, ones that she wore beneath her armor, invisible to most. Malik often caught her in moments of quiet reflection, staring into the distance as if wrestling with the ghosts of her own family's legacy. One such evening, she stood on the porch, gazing out over the lake as the sky turned a deep shade of blue. The air was thick with the scent of pine, the distant rustle of leaves and the wind providing the only sound. Malik approached her silently, his footsteps soft on the wooden floorboards. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. Zainab glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't think I've ever felt this free," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik nodded, understanding more than she realized. "It's a strange kind of freedom," he said, his voice tinged with quiet sadness. "The kind you have to fight for." Zainab turned to him fully, her eyes locking onto his with vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "Do you think we can fight for it? For what we found?" Malik felt his heart skip a beat. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. He took a step closer, reaching out to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was intimate, gentle, and it sent a shiver down her spine. For a moment, everything felt suspended in time. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them, standing in the quiet, the connection between them undeniable. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low, filled with the weight of his uncertainty. "But I want to try." Zainab's eyes softened, and she took a small step forward, her chest brushing against his. The proximity made his heart race, and for a moment, the space between them was charged with something more than just a physical. It was emotional, deep, and intimate, something they had both been avoiding for fear of what it might mean. "You don't have to do it alone, Malik," she whispered, her voice a soft caress. "We can face whatever comes together." The air between them thickened, and Malik's breath caught in his throat. There was a burning need inside him, something that had been growing since the moment they first met. He wanted to pull her closer, to close the distance between them completely. But part of him still hesitated, the scars of his past holding him back. Zainab seemed to sense it, and she reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "No more holding back," she murmured, her lips grazing his in the softest of kisses. "No more running from what's right here." And just like that, there was no more hesitation. Malik leaned into the kiss, his hands finding the curve of her back, pulling her closer. Zainab responded eagerly, her body melting into his as their lips met with an intensity that stole the breath from both of them. The kiss was slow at first, testing the waters of what they both wanted but were afraid to ask for. But it quickly deepened, fueled by months of unspoken desire, pain, and longing. Malik's hand slid beneath her jacket, feeling the heat of her skin as he pulled her tighter against him. Zainab's fingers threaded through his hair, tugging him closer as her body pressed against his. There was no more space between them, no more barriers. The world outside didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the fire that had ignited between them, the way their bodies moved together in perfect harmony. They broke apart, breathless, but neither of them wanted to stop. Malik looked into Zainab's eyes, his pulse racing. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with desire. Zainab didn't answer with words. Instead, she kissed him again, her body arching into his as her hands roamed over his chest. There was no more need for words. They both understood now. Their connection was real, raw, and undeniable. They had both been searching for something they couldn't name, but in each other they had found it. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of heat and passion, their bodies moving together as if they had been made for each other. The intimacy wasn't just physical. It was a meeting of souls, a collision of two lives that had been scarred by the world but were now, finally, healing in each other's arms. The following days were a blur of emotions and intimacy. With each passing moment, Malik and Zainab found themselves deeper in each other's lives, their bond growing stronger, more undeniable. The love that had quietly simmered between them now consumed them completely. But as their relationship blossomed, so did the challenges they would have to face. The media frenzy, which had initially started as a ripple, had become a full-fledged storm. Malik's name was now linked to Zainab's story, the woman he had saved. The press wanted more than just the facts. They wanted a narrative, a headline. And as much as Malik wanted to retreat into the safety of his quiet life, he knew it was impossible now. The world had cast him in a role he never asked for, and the more he tried to distance himself from it, the more the weight of it all pulled him back. But Zainab was there. She had become his anchor, and in return he became hers. As the media pressure grew, so did the emotional weight they carried together. They leaned on each other, their relationship becoming a beacon of trust and intimacy in a world that demanded everything from them. One evening, after the storm of interviews and public appearances had died down, they found themselves alone again, nestled in the quiet of the cabin. The world outside seemed far away, and for the first time in weeks, they could breathe. Zainab was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, a cup of tea in her hands. Malik stood by the window, looking out over the lake, the dark waters reflecting the stars above. There was something serene about the moment, something that felt right. "You know," Zainab said softly, her voice breaking the silence, "I used to think that everything in my life had to be perfect, that if I kept everything under control, I could keep the chaos at bay." Malik turned to look at her, his eyes soft. "I think we all try to do that," he said quietly. "But sometimes life doesn't give you the luxury of control. Zainab smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. And yet, here we are. You've taken me in when I needed help, when I didn't even know how to ask for it. And in doing so, you've healed parts of me I didn't even realize were broken. Malik moved toward her, sitting on the edge of the couch. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers gently. I'm not a hero, Zainab, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm just a man who's been broken by the world. But with you, I feel like I can start again. Her breath caught in her throat at the sincerity in his words. She leaned into him, her body fitting perfectly against his. You've already started, she said softly, her lips brushing against his ear. And so have I. The air between them was charged once again, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger, deeper. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, something that transcended the chaos they had both endured. And as their lips met in a kiss that was tender and slow, it became clear that their connection was more than just a fleeting passion. It was a bond forged in trust, in healing, and in love. Their kiss deepened, becoming more urgent and more desperate. The world outside faded as their bodies moved together, each touch, each kiss, a promise of something more. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about surrendering to connection they had fought so hard to build. Zainab's hands moved to Malik's chest, slipping under his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. She kissed him harder, her body pressing against his, the heat between them growing with every touch. Malik's hands found her waist, his grip firm but gentle as he pulled her closer. The intimacy between them was raw and unfiltered, a culmination of everything they had shared. Each kiss was a conversation, each touch a confession of everything they had kept hidden. As they pulled away, breathless, Zainab's eyes were wide with emotion. She rested her forehead against his, her chest rising and falling with every breath. I don't want to let go, she whispered. You don't have to, Malik replied, his voice thick with longing. Not ever. The days that followed were filled with the promise of something new, something real. Zainab had come to understand that the path she had walked, so carefully calculated, so perfectly curated, wasn't the path that brought her happiness. It was Malik's quiet strength, his ability to be vulnerable, to love despite everything that had happened in their lives, that had shown her what true strength looked like. The media's obsession with their story continued, but it no longer mattered. Zainab had taken a stand, and now it was Malik's turn to do the same. Together, they would face the world, not as individuals defined by their past, but as a couple bound by love, trust, and the unspoken promises they had made to each other. And so, the story of Malik Carter and Zainab Hale became more than just a story of rescue. It became a story of redemption, of two people who had lost everything, only to find each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. In the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed too loud, they found peace in each other. And in the passionate moments, when words were no longer needed, they found something even more profound, connection. Their journey was just beginning.